Hi, welcome to QuickTalk. My name is Axel Strombergson, Vice President here at Viva MedTech. In today's episode, we're going to talk about communication, clear and concise communication, and how that applies to your startup, such as your pitch deck or speaking to investors. With me as a guest today, I have Ryan Ramkilawan, who's a serial entrepreneur who took his first MedTech company to acquisition. Now he's a co-founder of the Innovation Exchange Coalition, which is a federally funded cross-borders innovation exchange designed to increase product commercialization within ecosystems throughout the world. So with that, let's dive in. Hi, Ryan. Welcome to QuickTalk. It's awesome to have you here today. Thanks for joining us. As you know, the session for today is to talk about communication, the importance of clear and concise communication, which of course is important in all aspects of life. But today we're also going to apply that to with the lens of a startup company, right? But welcome.
No, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Before we jump in and talk about communication specifically, why don't you give us a little bit of your background for the audience to kind of know who you are and the journey that you've had thus far?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. And, it's exciting to be able to share a little bit about my story and hopefully, hopefully it's helpful throughout our discussion. But quick background, and I'll make it as concise as I can. I started as a surgical first assist, similar to a surgical PA, many, many years ago. And all my training was in anatomy dissecting, and I specialized in organ transplant. So I did that for about 15 years, got out of the clinical side and went into hospital operations, where I did a lot of root cause of analysis, looking at unmet clinical needs and things like that, and which was new for me. But that's really where I learned the business side of healthcare. And through that journey, I was able to invent a few different products. One was a class 2 surgical apparatus that we used in surgery, and it really maximized workflow with the reprocessing of sterile instruments, unsterile to sterile instruments. And I was fortunate to grow that company for almost 8 years, expanded globally, and then was acquired in 2018. And then also an endoscopy company called Clean Endo. That was a really cool product that helped pre-clean endoscopes prior to the actual cleaning process. And that was really more a class 1 device. But throughout those 2 journeys, I really learned a lot about commercializing MedTech products, from patenting to quality systems to raising all the rounds of funding, and of course, growing a team. After those journeys, I got more into building accelerator programs, teaching other MedTech founders and also other industries. So I've been fortunate to build and operate medical device accelerators, general accelerators all over the world at this point. And then eventually got into corporate innovation, where I work with huge corporations like the NBA, FedEx, Ford, and building their innovation systems. And lastly, now I'm at the federal level, where I was appointed by the U.S. Secretary of Commerce to help advise the Biden administration on all innovation strategies that the U.S. is using, and also globally. So that's a pretty quick summary of my background.
Yeah, that's a really impressive journey, and I'm sure throughout that, communication has been a very important piece. But in that, so was there a certain point in time or part of that journey where you kind of realized that, communication is really important, and what was that event in your life?
Yeah, it's a good question. I haven't thought about this in a while, but I didn't realize the power of communication. Like, we as humans, we know that it's an important thing, but during my surgical training and also when I was doing organ transplants, that's where I really learned that. Because, like, as a quick story, I mean, it's a very time sensitive scenario. We're flying in on a jet. We're going into these various operating rooms. And as soon as we get there, it's such a complicated surgical scenario that immediate and quick communication is key. And I just learned how to do that, partly just from naturally adapting to that situation. And so when I look back during my MedTech adventures, and why I was communicating a certain way, there was a clear difference between how far I was getting, progressing my business versus maybe some others. And it really came back down to concise communication, which is what I learned in those scenarios. Being able to speak, not only just being concise, but also being warm and persuasive, and being able to get your point across at a human emotional level, it was key. And so later on, when I was, building boards and raising funds and things like that, there was an element, of course, of having credibility in what you were doing, your apparatus, all the different elements that's required for a medtech company. But at the end of the day, if you don't know how to articulate that or show it in a slide, what's the point? Like, we have amazing technologies all over the world potentially could change lives, but you can't even communicate it, so it falls on deaf ears, or it's not persuasive or motivational enough for them to do the next meeting, and
Right.
turn it into a discussion. So that's kind of where I learned communication was really a core element. And then I kind of dive deeper into it and really try to educate other founders on, don't look at this as just like a frivolous thing to think through. It's like, it's a skill that you need to figure out.
Right. No, that's really helpful. And you mentioned there, as part of a startup journey, communicating with various stakeholders, such as investors and key opinion leaders and things of that nature. Do you have any specific examples from your first startup, Restore Medical, where you kind of leverage that and how you approach that?
Yeah, I mean, there was like a pivotal meeting when I was raising my Series A. Like, basically, it was we had a little bit of seed capital, but then we went pretty quickly into a larger multi-million-dollar round, and it's super new for me. Like, coming out of surgery, we don't have training like this. We're just clinicians, and so a lot of it was a big learning experience. So I was going to a meeting with no real context at what a VC firm really does necessarily. I just know they're investors, and I needed money, and I knew how much I needed. So that was valuable because I mathed it out pretty good. But at the end of the day, it was just like getting prep for this meeting, which was in a different state. And it was just like, showing up and just being at the hotel was like, how am I going to actually make my point? And I was like, oh, like, when iPads had just came out in like whatever it was, 2012 or something. And then, yeah, I just like figured out that, okay, I need to download this app and put some words on a thing, because then it would be nice to have a backdrop to emphasize a point. And then I had some, general prototypes. So I had enough to like do a show and tell. And I was like, I just need emphasis words. I need imagery. And that right now, that's exactly how you need to present. I didn't know that. I just knew from communication that if I said this, I needed some kind of reference image or word or number. Yeah. So it was like, I don't know. I felt fortunate that I felt like I just invented slide decks, which is not true. I just had no idea that was a thing. Yeah, and I was like, oh, there's an app for that on the iPad. So did that presentation, and it really worked out well. I mean, we secured our funding round, but part of that was, I don't know, like the honesty of just being able to just show an image and talk through it, and being really upfront about this is where we're at, and it was a story as to why we're there and where we're going. And then, yeah, I didn't appreciate it as much as I appreciate it now, just because now I know so much more. But yeah, that's kind of how that started, and it was a pretty fascinating journey.
Yeah. No, but I think that really takes it to the foundation of pitching and communicating, that it is more about you talking and the story that you provide, and not necessarily all the data and text that you might have on slides behind you. So with that, I know that you teach a lot of pitching best practices and pitch decks and things of that nature. Taking this methodology onto that, what are some of the recommendations that you typically have for a good pitch deck and associated pitch?
Yeah, and just for like context for the audience, to your point, yeah, I teach this like all over the world, and what's interesting about that is, like, I just did the NBA's pitch competition, right? So the level of optics and persuasive pitching is a general key element of what I teach. And then the other side is that I teach it globally, so then you have cultural differences. But at the end of the day, there's core things, right? Like, it is a story, like, and people, I feel, especially on the scientific community, it's not necessarily the story just around the data, but the data should be part of the story. So if
Right.
you approach it that way, there's definitely elements in that in your data set that needs to come out, but you don't show a spreadsheet. You're talking about an impactful number. So generally, some of the key things is like really think about how human beings remember things, and we're all storytellers, and we like listening to stories from the time we were cave people. And so if you start with a story, we can actually retain that. And furthermore, if you're in a pitch competition and you're one of 10, for example, in a conference, well, the ones who get remembered are the ones who are going to either most likely win the prize money, They're going to be the ones that are talked about when the judges are deliberating, and it's typically tethered to a story. And so you prime it with a good story, within the time frame context that you have. And then you start using your data, using your traction, using you as your team. And how does that impact and fill the storyline, right? Like, this is why we're solving whatever. This is why we built whatever. And this is why we're the best at it. Look at all the traction we made. And here we are now asking for the prize money, the funding round, or whatever it is. And it's very impactful milestones. The quick, it's like, it's nice to use the use of funds, but it's really like, what's the outcome? And when you're doing presentations like that, it's really just to get them to like, I understand what they're doing. This is a really persuasive story. This surely is the team that can do it. And furthermore, this presenter was said that as concise as possible in a persuasive way that seems factual. Then you're going to most likely get that next meeting where you can actually dive into the data, and you can actually like, hey, let's pick this apart and spend 10 minutes on this animal study that we did and why we're really excited about it. That's not what you're going to do on stage.
Right. Right. Yeah, it feels like it ties very well into what also sells good, which is like, selling on emotions. And if you do have a good story and a good pitch, you are going to get some reaction from the audience, like a wow factor, right? And I think that's how you're going to be remembered, for sure.
Well, on top of that too, is another quick thing. It's like the story is the primer to allow the audience, the judges, the investors, whoever they are, their brain to absorb the story. It's like having a salad before your meal.
Mm.
You're hooking them in, they're paying attention because you just captivated in some way. So part of it is to elicit an emotional response, but put that part aside. It's really just to make sure that they're paying attention. And we're going to pay attention if it's an engaging opening story. I mean, every movie you see, every real good storyteller, that's how it starts. So you have to be really particular there. But then also, some of the, when you get more advanced, it's like thinking about how you use vocal inflections when you tell a story. Like if you're just monotone, nobody's hearing anything you're saying. But if you're like using pauses, 2-second pauses, and you're inflecting your voice appropriately, that's how good stories are told. So you can have a phenomenal story, but you still have to execute the story all at the same time.
Yeah. And I'm sure practice plays a vital role there too. So you don't go up like, you put the deck together 5 minutes prior and then things of that nature, right? So yeah.
Right. Yeah, practice is great. And yeah, being intentional about your delivery is what I think is forgotten a lot of times. Like, no, my presentation's amazing and my
Mm.
data is amazing. And clearly I have a fantastic, because it's a breakthrough designate, all these things, but that's not going to get you where you need to go. It's going to be you.
Right. No, that's great. And speaking about, talking to investors, often you separate between the pitch and a discussion. What is your view on that, and how does that tie into what we're talking about right now?
Yeah, so like again, like in a typical format where you're like presenting in a conference or whatever, like trying to aggregate investors, or even if you're not at a conference, you're going to have an initial phone call or a Zoom meeting. Think about it the same, right? You got to spend 3 to 5 minutes max presenting whatever it is that you're doing. And you're doing a few things. You're trying to gain credibility. You're trying to gain, a level of warmth between you and the investor that they actually want to book this next meeting. And it's not always going to be on the merit of the technology. And of course, sometimes that's the case, right? Like there's a strategic play with the investor. Like, no, we're looking at particular things and bone density or whatever. So they might take that meeting, but that's like, you can't control that. All you can control is that I did do this in a way that first off, they remembered, they actually think that I might be actually a cool human being. So they're more willing to meet. And what happens if you pull that off really well, when you go to the next meeting, say it's a 30-minute more partners deep dive, that person you pitch, they're your champion because they actually want to be there now. Like, oh yeah, Axel is really awesome. Like, his technology seems great. I really think he probably has what it takes to take us to the next level. And also the key to that is that one of the key things we're looking for on the investor side is that, can this team actually commercialize this? Like, 100% sure we'll get through FDA, and we're going to probably get through all the different hurdles, probably, right? Like, that's a given. We need to do that. And if that doesn't work, well, that's a different problem. But when we get past there, that's the real thing for a MedTech company, well, any company, is making sales. And so if you're able to be persuasive at this level where your data isn't even like fully baked yet and you don't really know all the stuff, just imagine what this team looks like when you have all of it sorted and now you're talking to customers. That
Mhm.
makes the biggest difference with successful companies and unsuccessful companies. especially at that early stage, you know?
Right, right. No, it's really good points for sure. So for our audience that are listening to this and recognize that they might want to get better in what we're talking about here, what type of recommendations do you have to improve your communication skills and things of that nature?
Yeah, I would say that's what I'm hooked on at the moment. But basically, is like understanding charisma. Like I'm telling you, I do this all the time, and it's like you'll see cool technology get nowhere, only because the presentation wasn't good. There's not enough charisma. Like we're still playing into our human behaviors, which charisma is a huge thing. So one book that, and a super short read that I try to get all the founders to read is called The Charisma Myth by Olivia Fox, and there's actually a chapter in there. So it's about understanding your charismatic style. There's like it's really great for like scientists because it's really based on scientific research on the different types of charisma. And if you want to be one way versus the other, here's some practical processes to improve that. And I think it's chapter 11. It's literally around presentations. The things that we're talking about now, it'll take a deep dive into presentation styles, audience arcs, things like that. And so yeah, the more you know, and the more you're going to interface with audience members like that or investors, just understanding your charisma, human behavior, will literally set you apart from all the other presentations that are out there. And again, you have to have all the other stuff, right? Like you have to actually have good business practices and figuring out your QMS and figuring out your budgets. Like that's part of it. So don't undersell that. But when you have all that, you still got to tell a story before you can be like, look at my spreadsheet, you
Yeah,
know?
right. Well, that's amazing. So the Charisma Myth is the book.
Yeah, by Olivia Fox. It's a pretty old book now, but it's a fantastic read. It's good for Audible as well. But yeah, it's really improved me a lot, but it's also helped a lot of founders just realize like this is why I'm not as charismatic as I want to be, and here's a few processes and exercises that actually help you get there. But I can 100% say if you really spend some time understanding you as a presenter, your charisma, and improve on that, or at least acknowledge if you are or not, it's going to make a huge difference on your presentations.
Right. Yeah, no, I'll definitely get the book. That's a really good recommendation. So, no, thanks so much for talking to us here today at Quick Talk. If our audience want to reach out to you and maybe learn more about what you do and maybe how you can support them, what is a good way to get hold of you?
Yeah, you can do my personal email. It's ryan@ryanram.com. Feel free to reach out, and if you're interested in learning more about some of the global initiatives that I'm doing, I'm always recruiting startups, a lot of it in health tech for various programs around the world. Please feel free to reach out. Yeah, if you wanted to get more recommendations on anything to do with presentations and charisma, I love talking about it. So I'm more than happy to discuss.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Ryan, for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
If you enjoyed this episode of Quick Talk, hit like and subscribe. And for additional educational content, visit our website at quickvault.viva.com.